Chinese-American Kaiser Guo is an ardent musician, passionate writer, and one of the long-time Beijing expats the entire international community seems to know. In 1988, Kaiser co-founded Tang Dynasty, one of China's first rock groups. Today, Kaiser joins Up Close to talk about life in China and the Chinese dream. Hello and welcome to Up Close. Today I'm talking with Kaiser Guo, one of China's pioneering rock musicians, now a corporate communications director. Kaiser, welcome to Up Close.
Thanks,
Thank you for being here today.
Thanks very much.
Now, Kaiser, introduced you as a pioneering rock musician. You're now a corporate communications director, but I feel like you're so much more than that. You're quite famous in the expat community. I mean, I would say almost everybody in this international community has either heard of you or knows you. You're involved in so many different things.
Well, that's very flattering. That wasn't ever what I set out to do, but yeah, I think it's a function of my having simply been here for so long. I mean, I've lived in Beijing continuously now for 17 years, and if you add up all the miscellaneous summers and earlier excursions here, I think it's probably bordering on 20 now.
I feel like a lot of the international community and like international media, when they want some sort of commentary or they're trying to make sense of something Chinese, a lot of times they come to talk to you.
Well, again, I mean, I think it's largely a function of my just having been here and paid a little bit of attention to what's happening.
Right. And I have to disclose to our viewers that actually we have known each other for quite some time. The Chinese-American community here in Beijing is quite small. We met a number of years ago. And I have to be honest, it was tough for me to figure out how I was going to introduce you, because you've started off as a rock musician. You're now working for a major Chinese company you're their director of international communications.
That's right.
And in the meantime, you're this very passionate writer. You're involved in different magazines, different publications. You're now the program host. You have your own weekly podcast talking about current affairs in China. So how would you kind of describe what you're doing, or you know, what would your title be, so to speak?
Well, I think there really is kind of one thread that ties it all together. It's that everything that I do, everything that I am passionate about, I try to make sure that it's doing something to advance mutual understanding between the Anglophone world, between Americans really, and Chinese, to cultures that I feel very close affinities for.
Right. This is often the role that a lot of Chinese Americans we end up being in. Is it hard? I mean, especially when relations may be, sometimes they're tenuous, sometimes they're better, sometimes it's a little bit more tense. Do you often feel that you're caught in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I think that there are more advantages to it than there are disadvantages. I think more often the fact that I have a kind of bicultural facility is an advantage. But yeah, of course, there are times where I do feel sort of, as you say, caught in the middle. It's like living on an island between the banks of two rivers. Viewed from either side, you kind of look like you're on a promontory of the other side. So the Chinese people will tend to see me as an American, and Americans will tend to see me as Chinese. But I mean, that's not something that it's ever really profoundly bothered me. Again, it's just so outweighed by all the good that comes of it.
Do you often find that you're defending one position when you're in a different country or talking to a specific person?
I try not to be defensive. Not in a sort of knee-jerk sense. But I think, yeah, I mean, when people say things that I think are patently unfair, wherever they are, irrespective of what country they happen to be in, when they say something that I think is unfounded or that I feel obliged to challenge, I will step up.
Right. Kaiser, I thought you would be so perfect for this Chinese Dream series.
Okay.
Just because of what we talked about. You've been here for over 17 years. You first came to China in 1988, is that right?
That's right. Well, actually, that was not my first trip, but the first time I lived in China was in 1988. Right.
China. Okay. So you've been here off and on for so long. So and given what you've done in music and in writing, I feel like you have this very unique, maybe artistic, perspective on things. So, this year President Xi Jinping talked a lot about the Chinese dream, the China dream, as a lot of people are calling it. How would you define, after all of these 30 years or 20 years, how would you define what this Chinese dream
Actually, I'd say it's more than 20 years. I think it really goes back, to China's first encounters with the West. From the, the moment when modern Chinese history began, when, the opening salvos of the Opium War. I mean, I think Chinese intellectuals, Chinese people, the Chinese nation has been looking for the secret to wealth and power, the way to exist comfortably in this very, very quickly changing world. And this is really no different. What we're seeing now, I think, this explanation of it, it really is part of that same ongoing quest for China to find its rightful, its comfortable place in the world. And part of that is, yes, is economic. Part of it is certainly in terms of its ability to assert its own sovereign rights as a nation, but also it's a psychological thing. It's being able to be proud of being Chinese, to be able to sort of get past the baggage that Chinese people so often find themselves saddled with. A century or so of humiliation suffered at the hands of Western imperial powers is not something that most Chinese people just sort of brush off easily.
So do you think this dream is an individual dream, or is it a dream of a nation?
I think that it's, of course, it's a collection of individual dreams, many of which have common elements, I think, and then which, taken in aggregate, have kind of an emergent property. They're greater than the sum of those individual dreams. So, yeah, I think that there are individual Chinese dreams. There is a China dream. And yeah, of course, there isn't a single one. I think that we're talking about a great diversity of dreams. I mean, what urbanites dream of, and what people who are from the countryside, migrant workers, for example, or minority nationalities dream of, maybe very, very different.
This dream, when President Xi first introduced this term, I guess like you said, it's not a term that was, it was always there. But once we kind of put it into today's discussion, political discussion, and discussion of current events, it kind of grabbed the international media spotlight. A lot of people were talking about, the China dream, the threat that comes from this China dream. How do you see that? Being an American, how can you interpret that?
I think it's hard for any incumbent power on earth to comfortably come to terms with the rise of another. I mean, historically, that's always caused friction. It's always caused dislocation. I think that so far, and touch wood, we've avoided anything, any open conflagration, any serious problems with it. But I think it's quite natural for, again, the incumbent dominant power, and since really before the Second War, America has held that position. Naturally, they're going to tend to see this. They're going to frame this idea of a great renaissance of the Chinese nation, or the China dream, in terms of what it represents from an American perspective. And that's not surprising to me.
Right. Well, I want to talk about the individual dreams now, because back in 1988, you had a Chinese dream.
Sure.
And that was to come to China and to be a rock star?
Well, to play rock and roll. I mean, I think stardom was something that was a little... I didn't expect anything close to that. I was invited to come to China to play with the band I was playing in college, a band called Freefall. And that fell through on our end. We couldn't scrape together the money for the plane tickets, which was all we really had to do. We were, poor students at the time.
Sure.
But I was the guy who was reading all the faxes and the telexes back then. Really dates me, telexes. But,
no email at that time.
Right, and I saw all this backline equipment. I knew that there must be somebody in China that was playing rock music, and I said, "Oh God, I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna find these guys. I'm gonna see what's happening." It was a lark. It wasn't a dream. It was just sort of an adventure. And I was a 22-year-old kid.
You're young, right?
Yeah. Just done with school. I figured I'd go spend a couple of years in China adventuring around.
Right, and little did you know that there ended up being a generation of Chinese who were introduced to rock music through the band that you founded, which is Tang Dynasty.
Right. That was probably the thing that I'll have done in my life that will go with me to the grave. I mean, I think people will maybe remember me for that, although I'm not sure.
Is that the memory that you want to leave behind?
Right.
All right. Well, we're going to come back and hear more about stories about Tang Dynasty from Kaiser Guo when we come back. Stay tuned. And welcome back to Up Close, where I'm talking with Kaiser Guo, one of China's pioneering rock musicians. Kaiser, we left the last segment talking about Tang Dynasty. This is a rock band that you founded, and it really affected, it created this musical movement in China. They were never introduced to rock music before.
Yeah, it was a weird. I mean, there was rock music in China, but it hadn't really, right, as you say, taken root. And Tang Dynasty certainly wasn't the first. I mean, we really have to name Cui Jian, who came before, and a number of other bands, some of which included members of the early Tang Dynasty. But Tang Dynasty, you could say, was the first hard rock heavy metal band to really hit it in China, and yeah, it did start something of a movement.
So you were a 22-year-old Chinese American.
That's right.
Seeking out rock music in China. How did the band come about?
Well, it was actually kind of funny. I enrolled in what was then called the Beijing Language Institute. It's now the Beijing University of Language and Culture. And while there, I met an American guy named Sean Andrews from Arkansas, who was also a musician, also a guitar player, and he actually sang really well. We liked the same kind of corpus of standard American classic rock. And one day, on the advice of a Russian friend that we had made, we made our way down to this music store where we were told there was a lot of imported Western musical instruments, and we thought we'd be able to find maybe a room to practice in the store, or some equipment that we might rent. Instead, we were invited by the manager of the place to play a kind of impromptu concert there. All these people came in off the street, and we were kind of jamming away, him on bass, me on guitar, and then we'd switch off. And then the actual owner of the place, or the big boss, came out, all sort of oily and bedizened with rings, and invited us to come back to the back room, where he very, very seriously asked us if we wanted to play on stage next week. This I translated for Sean. He told me, you tell the man, hell yeah. You tell him, hell yeah. And yeah, I mean, he's true to his word. We were on stage the very next week, and in the meantime, he had introduced us to Ding Wu, who's the co-founder of Tang Dynasty, and really the charismatic center of gravity of the band, the singer and also the guitarist of the band. And Ding Wu and I hit it off really, really well right away, and that was how it all started.
And that was pretty much it.
Yeah, from there.
So you had long hair then. You looked the part, yeah, already?
I had.
You're still looking the part?
Embarrassing haircut, the vintage 80s mullet, sort of business in front, party in the back, as it were. It was I think I've managed to burn all the pictures of me.
Tell me some of the challenges of forming the group, finding your other band members.
Well, that's what was really surprising, is how easy that all was. There were quite a number of people in the circle of sort of embryonic, in the embryonic rock world, and they all kind of played together in these shifting constellations of musicians. They didn't have formal names or formal lineups, and so we were one of the first to actually sort of make a band with four steady members, right, to formalize it, and to give us a sort of unified genre of music that we play. This is the style of music that we play. This is the distinctive mark that we're going to put on it, and this is the look that we're going to have.
And the name itself had significant meaning.
Yeah, I like to think so. I mean, that's people give me a lot of credit for the band. The truth of it is, I didn't do a lot of the composition. I had nothing to do at all with the lyrics, which are one of the great. People really overstate my role, but one thing that I can claim credit for is having given it its name.
Tang Chao.
Yeah, Tang Chao.
Right.
And the reason for that, I think, I was faced with this challenge, right? Here I was in a band playing a distinctly Western idiom of music, a style of music, heavy metal, that no Chinese person in their right mind had any reason to have a natural liking for. But I wanted to popularize it. I wanted to make it popular. And I thought back to my history classes as a university student, and I realized that, well, the Tang is widely regarded as the greatest of Chinese dynasties. Sheng Shi Kai Yuan. The whole, if you were to pull 90 people out of off the street and ask them all, what was the greatest dynasty, they would tell you the Tang. Most of them would, and most of them would when asked why, they would point to its openness, its willingness to absorb foreign influences, its cosmopolitanism, its actual sort of fetishization of things that were exotic, and that was a perfect cipher for what I wanted to do.
After Tang, you left Tang Dynasty.
In 99, right?
In 99. Well, music has continued to be a hobby. After you left Tang Dynasty, you started other musical bands.
Well, Twin Shows in particular.
Right, Spring and Autumn. Alongside that, you've also been writing. You had your own column in the Beijinger. Again, I think this was very influential for the whole international community. A lot of people have said to me, oh, the column that Kaiser writes really resonates with me as a Chinese American, as a foreigner. It's this unique perspective of being American, growing up in the U.S., but living in China and seeing things from a different perspective. Tell me about what you were trying to accomplish there.
So the column, which was called Ich bin ein Beijinger, it started. It was the back page column for 10 years in first the magazine. That's Beijing, and then in the Beijinger, when that whole editorial team left to found the Beijinger, I went with them. It started off fairly earnest, but then occasionally I'd write something kind of snarky or funny, and I realized that was the stuff that people really liked, and that was the stuff that was fun, honestly, for me to write. And so I sort of shifted and started focusing more on kind of humorous essays. And I would write
that made some sort of commentary on.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. Yeah. I think that as the years went on, I was moving a little further and further away from who the mainstream reader really was. I think there were a lot of people who had been reading me from the beginning who had a very similar experience to me. I mean, they were, a lot of them were, as you say, Chinese American. They, or at least existed between two cultures, and they could resonate with a lot of this stuff. But my life here started to get very normalized. I think that the normal pattern for people living in Beijing is a lot of ups and downs. Just, wild swings, where you have terrific days and you have absolutely horrid ones. And that was part of what generated the humor out of it. That you could sort of play to that love-hate thing. But for me, that sine wave had kind of settled into a much lower amplitude.
All right, when we come back, we're going to hear more from Kaiser Guo. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Up Close. Kaiser, what I find really interesting too is your family. You grew up Chinese American, and there are a lot of Chinese Americans. I myself am one of them. We thought we'd be doctors, we thought we'd be lawyers. There was a pressure in that direction. But of the 4 siblings, 3 of yours, or including you, came to China. You haven't done you haven't followed the typical Chinese American path.
No,
your sister started one of the first yoga studios in China, in Beijing. Your other brother has a musical.
That's right. It's going to Broadway in
Broadway in 2014.
Right, in 2014.
I just read about that. What was it about your family that created this kind of alternative path? I guess.
I can't. I could wax on for hours, but I'd start crying. But because my father and mother are just the best. They are just simply the best. They were always supportive. They gave us just the right amount of guidance. They really set our moral compass as well. They dedicated themselves, and they put real thought and energy into parenting. And I have to say, they were incredibly liberal. They didn't shove us into directions. They believed in us. They really believed that we, once they had sort of set us on the right path by the time we were quite young, that we would be able to make mature decisions for ourselves. And they let us, touch the hot stove. They let us cross the street. They let us, climb the trees. Learn our own lessons, right?
How did they balance your American upbringing with your Chinese background?
That's the other thing that I think they did exceptionally well. They taught us to deeply love America. And they did. They were. I mean, I grew up with a bust of John F. Kennedy, on the shelf in my dad's study, and I, grew up, fascinated with the American political system, with a deep, abiding love of America, and was encouraged always to understand, the history of, how this came to be. But at the same time, they made me love my Chinese heritage as well.
How did they do that?
I think they did it through example, just by living it, by showing, this is, what a dignified Confucian man does. This is how a proper Chinese woman behaves, and by telling us stories about Chinese history, they made us feel like we were the proper heirs to the complete legitimate heirs to two great civilizations, and that those two things, and that we should revel in that fact, that we should celebrate that fact, that we should take full advantage of that fact. I think that's what they did, and
without judgment on which one was perhaps better, or how did they
exactly
right?
It's the fact that I can balance myself that way it owes entirely to the fact that they could balance themselves that way. They would always find what was good in both cultures, and they did not hesitate to criticize what was bad. They shaped us all, including the one brother who didn't really come to live in China for any length of time, my older brother John. In many ways he has the most Confucian, the most Chinese personality. I don't know how to quantify that exactly, but there's something about his value system, something about him that to me, even though he's very, very Americanized, I mean, he
feels the most traditional.
Right. But traditional not in any negative way. Not traditional like in a sort of hidebound, hierarchical, kind of slavish mentality way. No. But in that filial sense, in the way that, he is, the way that he fathers. He has 3 daughters, and he's done a marvelous job raising them.
Sounds like an amazing family, amazing parents.
Yeah,
to learn from there. You now have a wife. She's from Beijing.
That's right.
And you have 2 young children.
I do.
What are you trying to instill in them? How do you
do
you raise them to be bicultural?
It's the same. I mean, I fortunately I have a good template. I have my parents to look at, and so I really try to do a lot of the same things that they did. I really try to push them into, I mean, not to push them into, but to
expose them.
To expose them, to make conspicuous and obvious what is great about the two cultures, so that they'll, they will celebrate both. And they do. They're great that way. They really do identify as both Chinese and American. I mean, it's too bad that dual citizenship isn't possible. But
what about passions? Because you seem to be passionate in whatever you do, whether it be your music or your writing or your podcast that you're doing every week. What about the passions for?
Yeah, I don't know where that
develop those.
I think that passion is a function of curiosity. I mean, I think that, or I know the two are somehow related. I'm not sure what the causal relationship is or whether there is one, but I've always felt like encouraging people to be curious. It always lights the fire of passions. And also, I think there's a touch of vanity in it. To be good at something, you must be passionate about it, or you won't be good at it. And if you're not good, if you've identified yourself as somebody who, I mean, if you hang a lot of your value, your self-worth on that, that's kind of a vain thing. But you don't want to screw up, right? And so the passion comes.
So after all of these very exciting sort of life experiences, whether it's been music or writing, why go into the corporate world? Again, you say you live a very normal life. Why corporate?
Yeah, my job is not corporate in a very normal sense. I mean, my job is terrific. It puts me in regular touch with some of my favorite people in Beijing. That is reporters. I mean, reporters are, just by their very nature, curious people and passionate people with a broad range of interests. I think I have the greatest job. I represent a company which I think is just, in terms of the way that it's governed, in terms of the mission that the company is on, is just such, is bringing such weal to the people of China and eventually to people outside of China. It's a
Do
company.
you think that's part of the Chinese dream?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it is. That company and its success is, for me, part of the realization of that dream. And they are a very enlightened company in that they do allow me to do the other things in my life that I think they know keep me passionate about my work. It's not so corporate, really. I mean, I can go to work just dressed like this.
You keep the long hair. Will you ever cut it?
No, I'm going to be one of those old guys with like long white hair, I think. Maybe I'll add a beard to it or something.
I love it. Now, what about for you? You know, it seems like your life has been a dream in itself. What's the future dream? What's the dream for your children?
Well, here's where it gets complicated. I think that I do want them to have exposure to America. We're thinking maybe in 5 years, spending part of the year there, having them in school in America, and at least my wife living there, and me maybe coming back and forth. It really depends very much on whether my working situation will allow that. But I would like to see them have experience in America just as I had experience in China. That's important to me. We go back to the States, once or twice a year, and they play with their cousins and stuff, and immediately become little Americans. But I wish we could do more of that. My dream in the future is to be able to truly live on both sides of the Pacific.
And truly be able to bridge going back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's a heavy toll on carbon thing, but
not the environmentalist dream.
Yeah.
All right, Kaiser, it's been such a pleasure
Thanks,
to have
Edie.
you on Up Close. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers at home for tuning in. We'll see you next week on Up Close. Bye for now.